Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roundtable, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm your host, He Yang, joined by Huang Shen and Neela. Good as always to have you, our dear listeners, with us. We have some fascinating topics for discussion today and every day. On today's program, volleyball is certainly a very popular sport in China, but the modest pay that players receive has surprised many sports fans. What explains this mismatch? And a high-profile case of domestic abuse has caught the attention of internet users. What's quite interesting here is, as we're looking for the answers to this question, has social media become a safe place to call for help? You can find us on Apple Podcast at Roundtable China. Subscribe, rate, and review us. You can also send us an email or a voice question to ezfmroundtable@foxmail.com, as we have a special segment on Roundtable when we have a heart-to-heart with you to answer your voice questions on the live show. But first, on today's Roundtable, the world of Chinese sport is an interesting place. The national women's volleyball team stands head and shoulders above most of the other teams. Needless to say, this is one of the most popular sports in China. However, the average pay of volleyball players remains surprisingly low. So we'll take a look at how players get paid and possibly the marketization of volleyball. So let's take a look at what's going on right now. How has this caught the attention of so many people?
At the moment, the 2019 to 2020 China Women's Volleyball Super League is underway, and the league kicked off on November the 2nd this year and will last until January 21st next year. And in total, 14 teams will compete in the 4 groups, and famous players of the Chinese national women's volleyball team were competing for their teams in the league. And tickets for games between teams with these famous players are on hot sale among audiences. However, compared to the hot-selling game tickets, the treatment of domestic volleyball players is not that good, which became a hinder for the long-term development of the sport. So maybe we can take a look at the average pay of female volleyball players and how serious it is. It has become a common sense that volleyball players' pay is not that positive. Usually, the income of a volleyball player constitutes of 5 parts, including basic wage, subsidy from local government, national allowance, bonus from sponsors. So when a player is still in his or her probation period, there's no wage, but some teams will give a certain amount of training subsidies based on their own situation of income and expenditure. But if the team is not rich, and they won't be able to offer such subsidies. And after a player passes his or her probation period and becomes a professional player of domestic volleyball player, he or she can get a wage from 1,500 to 6,000 yuan a month. Of course, this amount needs to be determined according to the level of the player and the region where the athletes are located. At present, the basic salary of most female volleyball players is only about 3,000 yuan a month. Of course, but if you are a star player, you might be able to earn more. According to media reports revealed that after China's women's volleyball team grabbed a gold medal at the Rio Olympics in 2016, the Turkish club in Istanbul offered an annual salary of 1.3 million euros to Zhu Ting, who is the captain of the team and an MVP of the game. But together with the income of commercial activities Zhu attended, she could earn probably about 20 million yuan a year. But she's just a single case because she's the most popular and most famous female volleyball player in the country. And I definitely think she deserved this payment because she's amazingly good. Yeah, compared to some football players in the national team.
Yeah, and also, well, this is really interesting in the sense that I see a few mismatches, so to speak. First of all, volleyball is such a popular sport in China. And when it comes to female volleyball, and there's even this term for the women's volleyball team spirit. Apparently, it is something that is seen as an emblem of victory, stemmed from hard work and inspired generations and generations of Chinese people. And the reason why is that this team constantly goes for the win and brings home the victory generation after generation of this squad. So if a sport this popular is not attracting so much money to it, then as it can, in theory, should be reflected in the payment of players, then it kind of may open people's eyes to this part of salary payment to players. So what do you think about this? Like, why is this happening, that there is this mismatch?
I mean, for me, I have to compare this. I had no idea that there was even a volleyball league existed, and I'm also quite surprised how popular this sport is, as you said, in China. Because in most countries I know, particularly even where I'm from, like, yeah, we do have a national team that also does very well, but nobody really seems to pay attention. And I feel that's where the main problem comes in. How much coverage, especially, is given to this sport? Because let's take a look at during the summer when you just walk around the city, you'll see people in jerseys of different football clubs because of the Super League going on. But now we have a volleyball league going on. I haven't seen anything to indicate that, or to make me question, hey, what's going on? What kind of league is going on right now? So I think when it comes to that, sponsorships, and especially when it comes to league teams, it's all about sponsorships, and the sponsorships will come if the sport has enough fan base. Yes, we say that the sport is popular in China, but how many people actually have you heard say, oh, I can't wait to go home this evening and turn on my TV to support our football team? And if we're not there to that particular point where we have enough fan base compared to how people get excited when there is a match for the Shanghai Renhe playing, or Beijing Renhe or of sorts playing. If we don't create that excitement, if that excitement does not exist around these teams or around the league itself, sponsorships are not going to come. And when sponsorships don't come, it means the players themselves, even though they are performing very well, they might not get paid really well. And in that case, it's only the star players who get the win, because they get scouted by other teams abroad.
And I have to say, for the China Women's Volleyball Super League, the development is a little bit uneven on the city space, because in my hometown, this is a very big thing. In my hometown, Tianjin, because our city's team, the Bohai Bank Women's Volleyball team, they claim 11 champions in this league. So this is a big thing in the city. So whenever there's a match of our city's team against other teams, usually people need to like fight for a ticket. But I think it's not happens for all the cities, and I think other cities maybe welcome this game is maybe in Guangzhou, and also in Shanghai. So for other teams, if their performance is not that amazing, and maybe the local fans won't care about this league and this competition. And also this year, I think Zhu Ting, who's the captain of China's volleyball team, she joined Tianjin's team. So Tianjin's fans are even crazier than before.
Yeah, she's definitely one of those really popular MVP players that you see her face on in commercials, on products that she endorses, and it's one of those really positive and success stories that I think draws attention to the sport, as well as would inspire tall girls in the future to really, instead of modeling, you can go into volleyball, okay? Although you need to start quite early, I suppose. But you need these kind of examples for people to want to get into a sport, I suppose. Because if we don't talk, if we look at just the pay for most people who are in this sport, and this is one of those cases actually would possibly stand as a anomaly, that the male players of the volleyball sport in this country is actually paid even lower than the female players, and that's kind of different from a lot of this general trend of gender pay gap for sports. In the world.
I think the problem with volleyball is it's such a hard game for people to get excited about. Like, the problem is it has the potential to make money, but it's such a whatever sport that it's really hard to feel the excitement that we feel whenever the Super League comes around. Like, we're sitting here and still conversations are still going on when I'm sitting with my male friends who are fans of football, and they're talking about the Super League and what happened in the last year's league. So the conversation carries on and on, even though it doesn't, the whole league is over, the season is over. But when you talk about volleyball, we have the excitement now, the fan base is there, but that excitement is only now. That attachment tends to disappear once the league disappears. Nobody talks about volleyball, unless I'm wrong here.
No, because if you have a mentality of affection over volleyball, you will have that excitement. Because I can use an example. One time, I think during the 2016 or 2018 Olympics, right? For the volleyball teams, there's a champion in the Olympics games. At that time, I was in South Korea. And I was in South Korea, but I joined a group. And on that day is the final of the volleyball team for the Olympics. All the people on that coach, they were using their cell phones, their smartphones, to watch the live broadcast of the volleyball game.
Did it have South Korean team?
No, not the Chinese tourists on that group, on that coach.
Yeah, but that's what my point is. That's because the games are happening at that particular point. The Olympics are on, so somebody who's a fan will turn on and watch the game. They want to catch the game. But let's say there's no tournament whatsoever. There's no league. The season is over. The Olympics are over. How many people do you actually sit down? Do you hear? Do you even sit down with your family and start discussing volleyball?
Yes, because it's a family thing. And when it's the Super League and they will have a match nearly every weekend or during the weekdays. So whenever I go back to my parents' house, and this is a family routine that you need to turn on the TV and watch a game and support your favorite team, which is your home team.
Right, but when this is not happening,
then you will have the national team.
The season is over.
The season is over, and then there will be the national games. Okay. So you can support a national team.
Okay. So if you have many games that keep on running over the year's time span, then maybe that's maybe also another way to get people hooked to a sport and to the television that is broadcasting the game.
But then again, I feel like the media in itself doesn't involve itself so much in creating that excitement in people. For example, like during the Super League, even if you're not a fan of football, you're more likely to follow your friends to go and watch the game, and just for being there. You're more likely to engage in a conversation about football, even though you know nothing about football. But I feel like for me, even though I know what volleyball is, but it would be really hard if somebody started a conversation about volleyball. I would just sort of either switch off, or my mind would just start wandering off, because it's a game that doesn't turn me on at all.
I understand what you're saying, but volleyball, especially the female team, it's really in a league of its own in terms of the kind of excitement and attachment that it inspires Chinese people.
I think it's an acquired taste. Let me just say.
But no, it's more than a game or more than a sport. It's more like that spirit or the mentality that people really appreciate.
Yeah.
And that comes from the generations of memory that is still alive today. Like, for example, like I can understand why Huang Shen mentioned that it's a family event when you talk about volleyball, especially when you're watching some of these games. More prone possibly that it is the female team that is playing. That is for our parents' generation, like when they were in their 20s, I suppose, so I would say like in the 1980s, and after China's reform and opening up and all that, and then the female volleyball team was this squad that sort of brought glory back home, and then they won so many world tournaments, like one after another. And then I remember hearing my mom telling me back then when she was in her 20s, and people went crazy when the whole city would be watching the same game, and when the ladies won the world champion, and then people went on the streets like holding lighters, and like there were some college students, as it was back then, I think the college higher education entrance examination was just resumed, and people were throwing their hot water flasks out of the window as just celebration to show that how much they appreciate it, and then just the general joy that was brought to people. So there's this memory that my parents are now like in their early 60s, and then even till today they're like, we support this team. and again, generation after generation of the players have really just brought home the gold medal. And just look at the male football team. What else? Basketball team? Like, what have they brought home? And needless to say, all right? so like there is definitely that support there, and that's also why.
But what? Okay, there is support, as you say, but why? Because if the support is such on such a big scale, why aren't we seeing money trickling into the game, into this league? Because it's money that if goes, a lot of money goes into the league, it shows that the support is solid. But why isn't that happening?
And that is the mystery.
Yes. And the reason why this phenomenon has triggered like netizens' anger was because back in September, and there was the I5BB Women's Volleyball World Cup. And during that time, the Chinese women's volleyball team, they defending their world like championship with 11 straight wins in the game. And then at that time, I forgot, was it like Chinese basketball team or the football team? They offer really unsatisfied performance during some important games. And then at that time, netizens found out even for these national like football or basketball teams, they perform that bad. They can still enjoy to fly with the business class. Yeah, but for the volleyball girls, they can only fly with economy class.
Yeah, maybe I think this is going to bring me back to yesterday's conversation where we were talking about salads and pork bellies. I think it's a kind of similar thing. Like, when you talk about basketball and football, they are just in their own league. Like the status that's given to that, because it's they are such global sports. Even volleyball is a global sport, but for some reason, its status is not seen as, I don't know, sort of some show off kind of sport. I think it's been a lot of majority of people would put it like the status to be a little bit lower, and I think that's where the problem is, because in general, even when the Kenyan team performs really well, nobody just really seems to care. And I think the problem again, the media. If the media does not create the excitement, if you see a sport being covered, the media talking, even the news channels talking about the sport constantly, it goes to show it's a big sport and everybody's going to support it, and anybody from around the world. But you see volleyball, it will only come up on a sports channel or maybe a small tiny segment during the sports news, and most people don't really watch. By the time you watch news and you get to the news part, you've already stopped paying attention, and I think that's where the problem is.
Or maybe it's commercialization, because those few sports that Neela, you just mentioned, well, of course they have more fans around the world and they're just a bigger sport, but they've developed into very mature, and you can even argue that overdeveloped into a business. And that it's highly professional, and a lot of business acumen has gone into it, and it's developed for decades.
And it's also about that they have attached some sort of celebrity status to like players who play in these leagues. Whereas we don't see that in volleyball. Maybe volleyball, they're just too nice and too good. They need to be a little bit controversial.
But actually, there is that celebrity status here in China.
Yeah, but it's on a nice note. Sometimes you see all these like you see basketball players, they're always on the. I'm not saying nobody should go out there and cause any trouble. I'm just saying there should be some sort of news that hooks somebody on a particular star or on a particular profile of a star from volleyball that will make people pay more attention. You know what I mean?
That's one way of marketing for sure. But what do you think sort of needs to happen here for volleyball if the players can receive a bit more pay?
Yeah, I think maybe we can think about how to better marketing this kind of sports and how to make it more entertaining and can get like audience who are not familiar with this sport still on the hook. I think we can draw on the successful experience from the ping pong tennis. And because before, ping pong tennis is also one of the strengths of the Chinese sports, but no one care about who's the winner. No, people may care, but people won't pay for it to watch a game because they're always a champion.
Yeah.
But suddenly, like there was like two really popular players who's Zhang Jike and Ma Long, and these two guys attracted a huge fan base and kind of revitalized the ping pong tennis, their popularity.
And how did they do that?
Just by personal charm and the charisma.
Yeah, so personality plays a big role. That's what I'm trying to say. Like in volleyball, people are just there. You know, in most cases, there's no personality in the game itself.
But I think we can try to make it more entertaining because recently the very famous director Peter Chan, he's making a movie on Lang Ping, who is the coach of the Chinese female volleyball team, national team, and
played by Gong Li, one of the biggest, movie stars in China.
An international movie star. And the movie is about to tell the story of this legend coach or even the former volleyball player Lang Ping's story, and is targeting at maybe released during the Tokyo Olympic Games. So I think maybe if at the same time our volleyball girls, they can achieve a really good result during the Tokyo Olympic Games, I think it will definitely boost the popularity of volleyball.
Yeah. Well, actually, here is another question, though, about the payment for athletes. We know there are a lot of athletes out there, right? And there are some sports that are just not that popular. It's not going to make people's head turn like the big sports. And even for volleyball, as you know, it's got that special status here in China, but maybe not elsewhere, like what Neela has just mentioned earlier. And is 3,000 yuan, so how many US dollars would that be?
500?
Yeah, something
even
like
less
that.
Than 500.
Less than 500
per month.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really too low? Is this something that is worth people's outcry? Because we're also looking at sports. It's special. It's not like or here. I mean, of course, I'm curious to hear what you have to say. It's not necessarily like a 9-to-5 job. Maybe you can see it differently, but it's like the winners win it all because they're the superstars, right? And then for most people, I mean, yeah, this is a bit of, it's also the really difficult thing to attract people to go into sports, because if you don't become the Michael Phelps of swimming or, the top person in your game, then maybe financial gain is just it's not going to reward you big. What do you think about that then?
I think when it comes to salaries, like a salaried athlete, it's different. Most of the world athletes in any sport, most of the money they make does not come from paid from the government. Most of them comes from the money they make from leagues or teams they play for, and so I'm not really sure how much they make, but I wouldn't imagine they get paid fat salaries, and that's why leagues are so commercialized. Because if you strive to be a better player, then when they play for the national team, they play for the pride of the flag rather than for the money. They play for a team because they want to make money.
Yes, and I definitely think 3,000 is quite insulting, because compared to other occupations, the athletic career may only last for 5 to 10 years. So you need to make enough money to support your entire life. And how can they find that glory by just earning 3,000 yuan a month?
Well, but also I think food and accommodation is paid for. So
what about injuries? You even can cover the medical treatment for your injuries.
Yeah, you make a really good point. And also, if a sport is not commercialized to that point, the payment is a little bit more desirable, then it is very hard to attract a new generation of talent to want to go into it. And you're listening to Roundtable. Coming up next, we'll talk about a high-profile case of domestic violence. How has that caught the attention of so many people online? And we'll be back with more Roundtable discussion.
Informed opinion and heated debate. Find out what's got China talking. And join us for your Roundtable discussion.
You're listening to Roundtable with myself, He Yang, joined by Nila and Huang Shen. Coming up, a high-profile case of domestic abuse has caught the attention of internet users. Has social media become a safe place to call for help? And the passing of actor Gao Yixiang, or Godfrey Gao, during the filming of a TV program has invoked debates. According to witness accounts that have surfaced so far, he had been working 17 hours non-stop into midnight prior his death. We'll discuss the issues surrounding this tragic news. If you are listening to our show on demand, you can find us at Roundtable China on Apple Podcast. And to the app that you want to look up, subscribe, download, all that jazz is 轻松调频 app. That's where you can find us. And now on Roundtable, as we continue our discussion. A female beauty blogger on Monday uploaded a video of a man attacking her and forcibly pulling her out of an elevator. The woman later said that she had been the victim of domestic abuse from her ex-boyfriend, which sparked outcry from Chinese internet users who have called for the man to be punished. And latest news came in after police investigation. This attacker is currently in criminal detention for 20 days. So let's revisit what happened as this beauty blogger called for help on social media.
The beauty blogger Yuya Mika, this is her nickname on social media, Weibo, a microblog in China, and she shot to web stardom and for her amazing makeup skills. And she posted a video on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And the hashtag has been viewed more than 1.9 billion times by Tuesday afternoon. And the video starts with the surveillance footage of a man who's, we can call him Mr. Chen here, whose nickname on social media is 妥妥的疯魔教, and this man forcibly dragging her out of an elevator as she tries to resist. While lying on the ground, she held the elevator door open with one leg. She said that she knew he would beat her after dragging her out of the elevator. So she was very terrified and struggled. And after she failed to hang on, the surveillance footage ended here. And the video next exposes more domestic violence incidents that involve her ex-boyfriend through candid interviews with his ex-wives and friends. And the video stated that Mr. Chen, he had been previously married twice before starting a relationship with Yuya Mika. And both marriages ended due to domestic violence. And Yuya Mika pointed out that Mr. Chen kept kicking her body. And she was so scared that she could only lie down on the ground and wait until he finished blowing off his steam. It's a very sad story. And I checked the videos. I felt like heartbreaking at what happened out there. It's a little bit too violent.
Yeah, it was difficult to watch that video. And so what do you think after reviewing the facts, Nila?
I don't know. I mean, in general, there's just one rule I always say: love shouldn't hurt. And I just don't understand why there are people, both men and women, who just they're just out there to hurt other people, and in the process they also like claim to love the person. I mean what I would like to really get into the heads and minds of these people, and especially because I feel sometimes they're very bad tempered. And this guy, obviously he has something going on with him, because with this kind of history, I don't think he should be in detention for just 20 days. He needs to stay somewhere in an institution for a long while, because he obviously needs to be cancelled or to find out what's the problem here.
Yeah, well, it depends on also whether this female blogger would want to bring this to court, and then that would be the next step of the judicial procedure. But at this moment, it's really it's heartbreaking and troubling to watch what went on, but also sometimes it's through these troubling moments when people start talking about something that can be very uncomfortable to touch on other occasions, I suppose. And with this man, he comes into this relationship with a history, but that didn't seem to have deterred the next woman to get into a relationship with him. Is that something to be worried about?
Yeah, I think the problem with, when it comes to the matters of the heart, it's a very complicated subject to discuss. I'm pretty sure she maybe had an idea or a clue, but she just chose maybe to ignore that. I don't know, but I'm saying maybe. And as it happens, a lot of people, when you're somehow you're experiencing those butterflies, the in love feelings, you throw out any single red flag to you don't care, because you're just fixated on your feelings and the lust that you feel for a particular person. And then when it gets to a really dangerous point, that's when like you snap out of that state you are in. It's almost like the feeling of love sort of tranquilizes people, that make you forget, that make your brain stop thinking or living in a reality. And so because you're so in a state where you're just feeling completely different, nothing is going to go wrong until it goes wrong.
I don't know if it's true, but it seems like most of the abusers, actually, they are very good at manipulating
and
people.
they can be very charming as well.
Yes, because when this girl reported on the social media, she said that during their relationship, even though they claimed they were like exclusive to each other, the guy was cheating on her constantly. So, but she still believed in him. And this reminds me of a tech talk I watched before. This lady, her name is Leslie Morgan-Stainer, and she was in crazy love. Like, for a time, she felt like she found her soulmate, and her husband was super charming. But he kept beating her up, and she wasn't realize it. So she tell people that maybe at first you never realize you're a victim of domestic violence. So if you're an outsider or you never been there before, you may ask the simple questions like why you don't leave him or why you don't report the situation to the police. But she wants the audience to know actually answer is super complicated because for a person, she didn't know that she was a victim of the domestic violence. Denial at an initial stage was so strong. So even they were in such a toxic relationship or violent relationship, she still thinks they have the obligation to correct this person's wrongdoing. She feels like she's the only one who can save him or who can improve him. But it's just like a very popular topic nowadays on Weibo. They say the chance of having domestic violence is either 0 or multiple times. You can never stop it as long as you notice the sign.
I always say, like, you need to, when you jump into a relationship, you need to like be there 1 foot in, 1 foot out somehow, especially, and also learn the history of the person, because sometimes you find you'll know this person has done something, but you just choose choose to ignore that. And as they say, once somebody has done something, once a cheater, they will always cheat. Once an abuser, they will always abuse. If they've done it once, they're most likely to do it again, not just once, but over and over again. And I think if you are in a relationship and maybe you had no idea and it happens once, I would say just get out of there. Pick your things, run as fast as you can. whether you're a man or a woman, because it's bound to happen again. And it's even worse when it's an environment that involves children, and this can have like detrimental effects on the psyche of a child or children. And I just think, I don't know.
This is definitely one of those really difficult topics to sometimes, to talk about, and also to get out of that situation. Actually, it takes a lot, not only emotional strength, but also financial strength too. If it's a woman that wants to leave this abuser household, and if she has kids and that kind of thing. So let's also take a look at the global scene in that regard. How serious is domestic violence?
Well, honestly, it's pretty serious, because according to the figures published by the UN, around 1/3 of women around the world have been victims to domestic violence. This includes sexual abuse, frequent verbal abuse, bondage, restriction of freedom, among others. And in the US, 1/4 of families have some form of domestic violence. It is estimated every 7.4 seconds does a case of physical assault carried out by the husband on the wife will occur. But I think there's another thing that happened in Chongqing, and we need to highlight that. Domestic violence is not only happen to women. Sometimes it happens to men as well. So we have to treat them equally.
Yeah, this is also a really important point, because, I mean, we need to give attention to both men and women, although the majority of cases usually has the victim as a woman. And in China, apparently 30% of married Chinese women have suffered from some form of physical abuse from intimate partners in the 270 million families we have in this country, and that's according to the All China Women's Federation. So also another figure here I'd like to present to you is every year nearly 100,000 marriages end in divorce because of domestic violence. And this figure, I guess people take it with mixed feelings, because in China, the mainstream traditional perception towards marriage or in divorce is that no matter what, you try to keep it together, to keep the marriage together. It's like 劝和不劝离. No matter what, you try to make the couple stick together instead
you
of
sellotape it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But domestic violence is an exception. It's a different issue on its own. And then actually, this is the part that I would actually say it's a good thing if this woman or man is leaving this household because of this reason. So when you look at this situation, we now have legal weapons to protect ourselves, as this is the 3rd year since China's first law targeting domestic violence has come into effect. And do we see some changes in that regard when we know we have this weapon in our arsenal to protect ourselves?
It seems like there are some improvements. For example, there are more convicted. So according to a report by China National Radio, the Beijing No. 2 Intermediate People's Court studied a second instance civil cases concerning domestic violence. It dealt with in the recent 3 years, and the court found out that 3 cases were cognized as a domestic violence in 2016, taking up 10.3% of all such cases, and the percentage rose to 25% in 2017 and 33% in 2018. And at the same time, we can see people have better awareness. And for example, like when they have been involved in this similar situation, they are more willing to report it to the relevant department and to try to find legal protection. But I have to say that maybe in bigger cities, or people are more consciousness about the situation, but still in some remote areas, people who are very conservative, they may still have this mentality, which is that domestic shame should not be made public. It seems like this is a family issue. And I don't know, for those abusers, they may have some mental problems, of course, and they may keep threatening the wife or the victim. So it gives them a kind of vulnerability that they don't know how to get out of this mess. And also at the same time, I think now the reason why it's a hard issue to deal with is, even for this case, you can detain a guy for 20 days. But what will happen after he has been released? It's only 20 days. If you can't put him into a life sentence, or you just don't give him a proper mental treatment or a healing session, he will keep doing the same thing, maybe threatening the victim again when he come out of the prison.
That's why restraint orders need to be issued, and this is one thing that victims can definitely resort to, as it is written in law, and this is something that you can apply for.
I feel like also these kinds of people, I mean, family and friends should also be a part of this, both for the victim and the abuser, because yes, the abuser might be also going through maybe a mental situation, and I think if family actually try to talk to this person and try to get him the help they need and try to make him understand that that's not the way to live, maybe it might kind of change that person, and also might help future incidences from happening. Because yes, we can put a restraining order for the current victim, but what about the next person, the next woman who comes into this person's life, the next man who comes into this person's life? They're most likely to be abused, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. Then it just continues. I think attention needs to, as much as we're paying attention to the victims, we should also pay attention to the perpetrators, because maybe there could be a way, if governments all around the world can come up with not just detaining people, but rather trying to help them as well, like a framework that might help these people. I think in that way we might be able to help society in the long run.
Yeah, that's definitely an important aspect that needs attention too. With this case, though, what stood out for me was this beauty blogger. She decided to use social media as sort of the atomic bomb, really. She dropped the video, and it got the attention of everybody. It becomes this big social discussion, as well as we see that the police got involved immediately as well. And do you think that this is one of those interesting cases, or what's your thoughts when it comes to social media and helping people for something as difficult as domestic violence?
I think the fact that she did it, she actually chose to release that video on that particular day when the world was observing, that occasion of eliminating domestic violence. I think she knew what she was doing, and she had planned it carefully, because she knew maybe this would garner attention more. And I think some people might say, oh, maybe why didn't she post it like a long time ago, and she just like posted on this day? Maybe she just wanted, some fame or people or clicks. But I think she carefully thought about this, and she thought if she did it on this day when everybody's talking about it, she would be playing a part. She would be perhaps educating somebody else there. She would be starting a conversation that otherwise most people wouldn't be talking about or wouldn't even care.
Yeah, and nowadays, because collecting or providing evidence is one of the hardest part in terms of domestic violence. And this is not the first case who revealed evidence on social media. And earlier there was another case, and a lady who was the victim of domestic violence, she used a hidden camera in a house to record what her husband did to her. And then she revealed all the details on social media. It's also caused a heated public debate. I think this is a very good way to find evidence, because sometimes if you hand this evidence to the police, you also need some human evidence, but maybe your relatives or your friends or your neighbors, you don't want to meddle with your family issue. So by this way, as you have the public support, and maybe the police will trust you more, or you have better or more concrete evidence.
Yeah, this is definitely something that we're not new to social media anymore
Yeah.
in the year 2019. I think for anybody that is releasing information, particularly private info like this on social media, then they must have thought through the kind of messy situation, also battlefields that they're stepping into. As with this case, just within hours after the video was released, the identity of the perpetrator was all over the internet, because now when you release anything of such gravity on the internet, and then you know yourself and then anybody involved would lose their privacy.
Right.
And that's also, I think, another violent aspect of it, although this is maybe virtual violence as well. But there are so many different facets to a case like this that that I think is it's opportunity to talk about it, and also to look at the details that has been revealed.
Right. And also I think just by releasing that video, yes, maybe she would have just wrote something about it, and people might have talked about it, but not at such length, or it wouldn't have made national news. But now, because of the video, there's evidence there people can see, and this triggers a different reaction, a different conversation. And I think because this perpetrator is facing some sort of punishment, it might also, it might occur to other perpetrators as well to think about their actions. So I think it might scare a lot of people who have a tendency of being involved in domestic violence to sort of think about it and not do it again, because they know now the consequences. It might be recorded, and maybe they don't want that, because if you're employed and your employer sees you that, you're going to lose your job, and the next employer is not going to take you up either.
That's a good point. And also this could give courage to all the victims that are in a similar situation or feel trapped in that violent situation, that there is a way out, although it takes courage and strength to get yourself out there, but get yourself out of it. So there is always that route you can take. And you're listening to Roundtable. Coming up next, the death of an actor on a TV program has invoked stark debates in China. Stick around, everybody, to find out more on that.
Looking for passion? How about fiery debate? Want to hear about current events in China from different perspectives? Then tune in to Roundtable, where East meets West and understanding is the goal.
You're listening to Roundtable with myself, He Yang, Huangshan, and Nila in the studio. Gao Yixiang, or Godfrey Gao, Chinese and Canadian model and actor, has died from a sudden heart attack while filming Chase Me, a reality show on Zhejiang television on Wednesday. Recently, the official Weibo account of Chase Me has issued a news release saying that Gao suddenly fainted in the early morning on location and died at the hospital after doctors worked more than 2 hours trying to save his life. And according to the same Weibo account, it said that first aid was given to Gao before his death. Well, this has started another major discussion in China about the treatment of workers, and including those working for the entertainment industry. Well, our hearts go out to Godfrey's family in this time of sorrow, and it's painful to talk about this. But according to the information we have so far, what do we know about what happened prior his death?
Yeah, we can take a look at of this reality show, which is called Chase Me, in Chinese 追我吧. So that show invites stars to run in the city late at night, and with a group of followers chasing after them. To make this show more interesting, the chase includes challenging obstacles such as climbing a 70-meter high building. So before Mr. Gao, he collapsed, he was just doing some running in part of the reality show, and suddenly he fell out. He collapsed, and he just fell out on the ground. And at that time, you should give him emergent treatment, and because he might have some problems. But maybe the cameraman thought that was just for the dramatic features for the show. So the emergency just came maybe several minutes later. So that's the basic story what happened. But it reveals a truth or the facts that is many celebrities, when they were filming for the reality shows, they may face a situation that overtime recordings, usually these reality shows, they need to be filmed during the nighttime, which may start from the afternoon and to the early morning or to just the morning time of the other day. So usually they have to do it by staying up late. And honestly, it's a little bit against people's biological clock. So it's not very healthy, of course.
And also the accounts emerged that Godfrey Gao was working 17 hours and around
non-stop.
Yes, and this was late at night. And also this show that he participated on requires a lot of physical strength. And so it's celebrities competing against professional sports people or though but celebrities and civilians compete, that kind of thing, but also they're competing to professionals kind of thing.
I wonder if they did conduct any form of medical checkup, because people just don't collapse from nowhere and just die. Obviously this was a trigger. Maybe he might have had something going on, maybe especially with something to do with cardiovascular, his heart, that was missed. If they had maybe checked, maybe they would have tried not to make sure that these guys are not, put on a very demanding schedule. And I think this is just a call, a crying call that shows like this and many others need to really look at their schedules, especially, and put in mind that we are humans, not robots.
Yeah. And also this begs the question of his agency as well. If the stars that you've signed and you put them to work like this, it's not only the show, but also the agents should be there representing and safeguarding this guy, right? I mean, there's... What are the parties that you think need to get involved to make lives a bit easier for these guys?
I think the schedules should definitely be controlled. This is not the first case. You see a lot of people dying for overworking themselves. And these are some people, normal people, young people who look very healthy, but because of the schedules, crazy hours, I think, seriously, there should be some sort of law that protects people from being overworked.
Yes, and that includes everybody, not only the everyday workers, but also the celebrities, the stars that seem to be enjoying the spotlight all the time, but there's also this other side of this difficult life. You're listening to Roundtable, and that brings us to the end of today's show. You can always find us on Apple Podcast at Roundtable China. We'll see you next time.